And action. Hey, so today we're going to talk about the 1929, 1930 Domenjoz Glider. This, they call it a gloop, which is a glider with a sloop rig on top, this is a very odd piece. This was designed by John Domenjoz. He was a Swiss-born aviator. He was a Blériot test pilot demonstrator. Uh, in World War I, 1916, he ended up in Europe as an instructor, test pilot, and flew through the war. And after the war, he was in and out of the States. Uh, so this aircraft was built in the late 20s, and it was apparently his design. And if you look at this, which you can't really see, him being a Blériot guy, the airfoil, the fuselage, all the details are Blériot. If you remember that Blériot that's hanging in the Women Dare exhibit overhead, yeah, if you look at it, it's the same structure except for this crazy sail rig. So his idea was this would, kind of like perpetual motion, this would propel the aircraft in the air and it could stay in the air. Well, it's a science question here. It doesn't work. It was towed numerous times, and when that TV is on, it shows it is really cool being towed. It does not fly with sail power. Just it has to be towed, and that's a whole long scientific thing. You can go faster than the wind against an object, but you have to have a keel or something touching the water or the ice. Ice boat can go 3 times the speed of the wind, but you can't do it when you get in the air because then you're going the speed of the wind. It's like flying a balloon in a hurricane. You can light a candle. Doesn't work. You have to go faster than the relative wind, to develop lift. So it just doesn't work. But it is a cool piece. So this aircraft was flown at Old Orchard Beach. We talked about Old Orchard Beach with the Standard. Old Orchard Beach was the center of Maine aviation, East Coast, kind of northern East Coast, back in the early days. And the Millikens next. We're going to talk about that. But it flew, and then it was stored in a crate, and it was forgotten. And the people that it was on their property when this was kind of resurrected in the 70s donated to the museum around 1974. So it came up here, and it's been restored. I recovered it, the wings and tail, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So it's displayable now, but it is a piece of Maine history. That is the cool thing about this thing, that this ties to Maine right here, this very piece. So I'll do any questions as long as you don't talk about why it doesn't fly. They call them blinkers. I don't know if it's a stabilizing thing. It's very odd. There's bungee cords, and there's a lot of nautical stuff in there. If you look in that cockpit, there's like 5 wheels and levers, and there's a lot of stuff going on to set the sail and jibs, and oh my gosh, it's nuts. So that had something to do with stability. There are pictures of it without these in the beginning flying, so it was an add-on. Why, I don't know. It can't fly even in a crosswind. It just doesn't work. Yeah, but it is pretty cool watching that video, and you can see this thing going down the beach and actually flying. We had the chance to take it down to Old Orchard Beach. There was a kid that had a Make-A-Wish event on the beach, and we had it packed and everything, but ended up couldn't go. So pretty cool. Does it float? There's a picture of it when it's landing in the water, kind of. No, it does not float. That is wide open. It's not supposed to be a boat. It did land in the water once, but accident. So no, it is not a boat. It's supposed to fly. Not supposed to be a boat at all. It's supposed to fly down the beach. Now, we'll talk about a little bit on that Milliken out there. When you land on the beach, you don't land in the soft sand. Very soft. You get stuck on your back. Next to the beach, the hard packed stuff that's wet is concrete. So a lot of transatlantic attempts took off from Old Orchard Beach. When this was on the beach, there was other famous airplanes that were trying to cross the Atlantic, some to make it, some never to be seen again. So 2.5 miles of hard packed sand is a pretty darn good runway. long gone. After the war, just went away. So, but it was for years. Now you go to jail if you land on the beach. Back then, it was actually Harry Jones, in the color that standard is in his honor. He was the operator of a flying service on the beach, giving rides in jennies and standards back then. Pretty cool. He did. It was after his trip uh, to promote aviation. They went to every state in the union, and the only time he was late was going to, I think, Scarborough, southern Portland, southern Maine here, and he ended up on Old Orchard Beach because of fog. So he stayed overnight at Old Orchard and then made his trip. But that was the only time he was ever really late for a stop, was right here. So he's landed on Old Orchard.
Did Domenjoz try to improve on this idea, or was this the end of the road?
This was the end of the road. It was patented, though. He actually started a company and patented this aircraft, but it's perpetual motion. I mean, I don't think, and who knows the story behind him later on. I think he just kind of faded into obscurity, but never saw anything past this. This build quality is absolutely stunning. I mean, we're going to look at this Milliken next, and that was one of the first home builds in Maine, and it is just built with a hacksaw and a hammer. And this thing is, if you look at all these fittings, it is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it's just gorgeous. Now, Sikorsky was near this area. There was some places that, he might have had access to build these things, because it's aircraft quality. It doesn't work. Any other questions? All right, let's head out to the Milliken. Okay, we're out in the Restoration Annex building. First piece in here is a 1932 Milliken M1. It's kind of a Russell monoplane. It was built by a really neat gentleman named Bill Milliken from Old Town, Maine. So he got all revved up after Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic, like a lot of people did. So he got all excited about aviation. So in 1927, 1928, 20, he started building this little home-built airplane. We don't know if it's the very first, but it is one of the very first home-builts in Maine. So this airplane is all wood, and it has a converted Henderson motorcycle engine. So they were kind of popular airplanes, this type of airplane back then, but you had to be really light to fly this thing. It's a really light airplane. But he built this thing and built it up in Old Town and brought it down to Old Orchard Beach. So here's Old Orchard Beach history right here. So he brought this thing down and he flew it in 1933. And the one and only flight, at the end of the flight, he landed in the soft sand over on its back. So there's a great picture. I don't know where the stuff is, but it's a great picture of him standing next to it on its back. It was propped back on its wheels, put in his mom's barn till she died at age 100. And it came up here in the late 70s, 77, 78. So it's been up here ever since. The coolest thing about this airplane is this is untouched since that day. This is 1933, not a bit changed from that flight. So you very rarely see a piece that is untouched original. You never want to restore this airplane because you'll ruin it. Bill Milliken went on to become, it was a success for him. He became a famous engineer, aeronautical engineer, and automotive engineer. He was into racing, design leaning wheel race cars, big thing, but he worked for Boeing and helped develop the B-29 and all that stuff. So he became pretty successful. And this was the beginning from his teenage years. This is what a teenager can do when he doesn't have a tablet in front of him. So pretty much that's it. I mean, if you look at one side of this Milliken, this is built, when the Depression was started, and he had one set of stencils. I believe it. I think it shows the lettering. He went backwards because he had one big M, and it starts on the other side reading that side. But it's kind of interesting to look at both sides, how he used one set of stencils instead of making two. And his mom sewed up the fabric for it. His mom was right behind him, 100%, as it should be. But if you look close, you can walk around this thing and you look at the cockpit. I still don't know how you can get your head through there. but it is almost, I mean, his head, it must have stuck right here. I think they put him in and put it over. But anyway, this sits here. It's got to go somewhere someday. It's going to be on display, hopefully. But it is a beautiful piece of history right here. So any questions about this? Um, good question. It's a good question. And it's not because of prop. A lot of times it's because of prop diameter. They have to keep it up out of the ground. But that's a very small propeller. It's just the way it's designed. Um, yeah, yeah. Peatpaw is quite a bit bigger prop. I suppose that's part of it. I mean, it's an air-cooled engine, not going very fast, so you do have to keep those in clean. It is definitely a somewhat of a deep-bellied fuselage on this thing. The little Heath parasols, which these engines were common on, were very small fuselages. So, but they did use these on there. So I suppose, yeah, keep the wind. Probably the biggest thing is to keep the wind going through it. It is wonky. Yes. So there is one thing about this airplane. Get into design stuff. He built this airplane. Like I said, it's a lot of his ideas and a lot of his influences that influenced him to do. The balanced rudder and dihedral on the wings were not in the original design. So apparently he built this thing, was going to fly, and then he read this book on engineering. They said, "Oh, you've got to have a balanced rudder. You got to have a." So he did all this stuff and he changed the design. And he said it was the one flight. I don't know how many hours of flying he had. His one first flight was out of control. Was basically had no clue. So all that stuff was not good for this design. And we have the cool thing is we have the original rudder and the other propeller that was in that picture that went on its back in storage. So everything with this airplane is in this museum. So correct. Yeah. And that spins pretty fast. So this Henderson, you're talking close to 3,000 RPM, which is too fast for efficiency. So you need to gear things and reduce speeds and stuff. But as a direct drive, right out of a motorcycle, they cut the transmission off. Sorry, Ron. And then they turn it around. It's just like a Model A Ford. They turn the engine around, and that's going forward now, called the tractor. So it is basically it's a motorcycle engine, probably 27 horsepower around there. Basic thing. But Bill Milliken was a small guy. Bill Milliken used to come here. He was the sweetest man you could ever meet, and big into history, old Orchard Beach history. He was a really cool thing. And we took this airplane down. I don't know. Do you remember this? I don't know if you remember it. 15, 20 years ago, we brought it down for his book signing. Took it. It used to hang over my office. Took it down, brought it into the main display, set it down. They took his the Old Town Historical Society had one of his cars, his pedal cars, when he was a kid, and they set it all up, and he came for a book signing, which was pretty cool. Then went back up, and it is very delicate. I mean, it is just so. This is built pretty crudely compared to that Domenjoz glider, but it did fly. I mean, it was. I mean, this is flying. It was real flying. So, but it was not for him. That one flight was success, total success. He did. He did. Yeah. I don't know when he stopped. I think he went through World War II, Fairchild and stuff like that was flying stuff. But yeah. But he was more into engineering. He was more into designing. Some pretty famous, I believe, at Watkins Glen in New York State, he has a corner named for him, and usually that's named when you're deceased. That corner is named for, but he's a living person that had that corner named for him. Milliken Corner. Anything else? That's it. So you guys graduated. This is the last aviation topic we're going to do. Warren's going to be giving all the rest.